Hi, I thought I'd look at Tissue today, which I know is a poem that causes GCSE students a few headaches, but don't worry about it, we're going to sort it out. Okay, so if we read just the first 3 lines of the first stanza. Paper that lets the light shine through, this is what could alter things. Now that's quite a dramatic statement because when we think about paper, we think about something that's impermanent and fragile. So how could it alter things? But the poet seems quite definite that it can, because she even puts a full stop at the end of the 3rd line, which is a rare punctuation mark in this poem. So what on earth can she mean? Well, I've already been using a technique. When we looked at the word paper, I suggested, well, that makes me think of something impermanent and fragile, and that's what I call word association. So you can now apply that deliberately in order to generate some ideas, some interpretive ideas. So the word paper makes us think of something delicate and flimsy. So what could she mean by its altering things? Well, you just need to take those sorts of associations and extend them. So yes, paper is impermanent. Yes, it's fragile. But when I think a little bit more about it, I realize that the paper is something that lets me communicate my story to someone else. It lets me impart information or knowledge to other people, and that's what it's designed for, to let people do that. So then if I look at the word light, I'm thinking, can I connect light in any way that connects to the concepts I've been generating around the word paper? Well, yeah, I think of light, and then I think, well, the planet would be a bleak, black, ice-covered ball in space if we didn't have the sun. So I associate light with life, and then I might think angels, and then I might think of God, and I think, well, maybe light is the light of truth or knowledge. And the poet says that paper, which we've already seen as the instrument of communication, lets light shine through. So if we take light as being the light of knowledge, maybe the poet's saying that paper is the way we get to see the truth about our world. And that is quite a powerful idea. But the poet isn't going to take it easy on us. She's not going to say exactly what she means. In fact, if anything, she makes it trickier because she just keeps refining and extending this metaphor of paper throughout the poem. So in line 4 of the first stanza, she says it's not just any old paper, but paper thinned by age or touching. So what ideas are generated here? Okay, so keep using your association technique. And you just think, well, it might mean that paper is being kept by people, perhaps in the form of books, and has been passed down from generation to generation. So that implies that maybe the paper has been well cherished and respected by the people who own it. And the fact that the paper has been thinned by touching implies that the paper has been often opened and handled and read. Okay, so the poet gets more specific in the second stanza. She gives a specific example of the Quran. And as soon as you see the word Quran, then obviously you're going to think of religion and religious truths, which does sort of emphasize or affirm this idea of light being the light of divine truth or knowledge. So maybe what the poet is saying is that paper is passed down from generation to generation, and it contains sacred truths, and that is what can alter things. But then she thinks about the Quran a little bit more, and she thinks, well, it's not just a text of holy words. The Quran is also a place where you can write down who was born to whom. So this image, where a hand is written in the names and histories who was born to whom, refers to a tradition which was quite common amongst Christian in past times as well, where if someone is born, their date of birth is written in the front of the family Bible, and when someone dies in the family, the name and date is also put down. So it's a way of maintaining a sense of continuity between family members who arrive and family members who depart. So the Quran isn't important just because it hands down so-called divine truths or the light of divine wisdom, but because it also passes down information personal and relevant to the particular family. And this is an idea that the poet seems to want to emphasize because she spends a lot of lines detailing this image. So all the way down to there, she details this idea of these very intimate familial details being passed down through the generations. It spills over into the next stanza. So she's using enjambment here, and she's also using it here. And this sort of suggests that the details of these individuals are really important, at least to the people writing them down or reading them. So maybe she's saying paper is important because it keeps us interconnected in the same way that enjambment is keeping these lines interconnected and keeps her idea of the importance of family flowing from one stanza to another. So that's a very interesting idea to consider when you go back to the title of the poem. So just scroll back up, thinking of interconnectedness. We've got this word tissue. So again, we're just going to brainstorm and word associate here. So tissue could obviously just mean paper, but we also think of human tissue. Now, human tissue is just made up of interconnected cells, cells connected to one another. So maybe what she's saying is that just like cells, every individual in a family needs to have a sense that they're connected with other members of their family, and paper is the way that they do that. So the poet goes on to say that the pages are smoothed and stroked and turned transparent with attention. Okay, so this phrase here, smoothed and stroked and turned, the repetition of and here, that's polysyndeton. Now, polysyndeton just means adding a lot of ands in between words. So instead of polysyndeton, I could just say smoothed, stroked, turned, but that would give quite a different feel. So polysyndeton, the addition of these ands here and here, emphasizes the meaning of the words turned, stroked, and smooth, and kind of reflects the insistent, sort of constant loving attention that people are giving the pages of these cherished books. But again, it's a metaphor, so really what she's saying is that these people who have a deep love and respect for their books really have a love and respect for their family and for the importance of interconnection between family members. Okay, so then she goes to talk on about if buildings were paper. Now, again, she might be saying, given that paper is a metaphor for the importance of community and knowledge being passed down from one generation to another, if buildings could somehow incorporate that sense of connection, maybe she could feel their drift. Now, that's a little metaphor there. If you feel someone's drift or see or catch someone's drift, it means you just simply understand what they mean. So maybe the poet is suggesting here that wouldn't it be great if buildings generated the same kind of interconnectedness and sense of community, just the way that the paper of a Quran or another valued or cherished book creates a sense of community? Wouldn't that be terrific? Wouldn't we just suddenly understand the meaning of our city and the meaning of our lives within that city? And then the poet reverts to the idea of paper being impermanent, though. She says, see how easily these buildings would fall away on a sigh if they were made of paper, how they would shift in the shifting direction of the wind. So these words, fall away, shift, wind, sigh, all of that is again suggesting how impermanent paper is. So now she's stressing that initial idea that we got from the first 3 lines of the poem, that paper is impermanent. So how do we connect these two ideas? The fact that she seems to be emphasizing the impermanence of paper, and yet paper is the means by which we stay permanently connected to people who have gone before us. How do we connect those two ideas? Well, perhaps to the poet, impermanence is not necessarily a negative thing. She then goes on to talk about maps. And if we think about what she's saying about maps, we might get an idea of how she's she's actually being quite consistent in her ideas about paper rather than inconsistent. So in this stanza, she's not talking about old ideas that are passed down from generation to generation, as with the Quran, okay? She's talking about new ideas this time. So you really can't talk about the reality of far-off lands unless you've left the home you've grown up in and are familiar with, and you go off exploring. So, new ideas. The permanence of being in one spot forever simply isn't a good thing. How can you generate new knowledge? How can you really understand where you are in the world unless you leave the old things behind and go and find the new things? So here, this stanza is really opposed to the one up here with the polysyndeton, smoothed and stroked and turned, because here you've got a total absence of connectives. You've just simply got all your nouns placed one after another in a list, borderlines, marks that rivers make, roads, rail tracks, mountain folds. Well, this is the opposite of polysyndeton, and it's called asyndeton, and it simply means absence of connectives. And what's the tone that's created here? Well, it's almost like a sense of rush, a sense of swift movement, and that kind of reflects what you need to go and explore the world. You need a spirit of adventure. You need to rush off, just like Bilbo does in The Hobbit, you know, when he leaves his cottage to chase after the dwarves. So what she's trying to say after all that is impermanence is not a bad thing. It's kind of a good thing because it leads you to make new connections and to gain new knowledge. And new knowledge is what we need to make sense of the world. So in that way, the impermanence of paper is a virtue, just as much as its ability to pass down old knowledge is a virtue. Okay, so then she goes on to talk about fine slips from grocery shops. Well, by fine slips, she just means receipts that we get from buying something. And again, just as she did in the stanza previous, where she's using lots of interrogatives, where and how, on which date and who, to convey her really persistent curiosity and interest in the individuals who are dying and who are being born and who are marrying. She then repeats these sorts of interrogatives here. How much was sold and what was paid for? So again, she's not just interested in the family, she's interested in the wider community, what they're doing, how much they're paying, what they're buying. So she's contrasting this stanza with the interconnectedness within families. The interconnectedness within a family is really important, but the interconnectedness between everyone, like the general public, social interconnectedness, is important too. And how does that become generated? Well, it becomes generated by little tiny trivial seeming things like paper receipts, our interactions with other people. Even if it's just a mundane thing you think you're doing, going down to the shop to buy a pint of milk, you're interacting with other people. So what she's saying is, what if those receipts, what if those small testaments to our daily interactions with other people were used to build our buildings? Then they might fly our lives like paper kites. Now, that's an incredibly positive image. So it sort of gives a sense of our flying upwards, and the motion of moving upwards implies a sense of progress and of freedom. So she's saying if we could just value that and bring that notion of interconnectedness into our buildings, we could really start to feel free. And that's what she then goes on to say. She says an architect could use all this, place layer over layer, luminous script over numbers over line, and never wish to build again with brick. So paper is really contrasted with brick. We get this lovely word luminous, again letting the light of truth shine through. And its vulnerability just seems to be such a virtue in comparison with brick, which suddenly seems like a very hard, obdurate, stubborn, almost stupid thing to build your buildings out of. And that's emphasized perhaps by the alliteration here, brick or block, that the sound of the B's, persistent B's, is really quite almost brutal, if you like. But let the daylight break through capitals and monoliths. So paper, unlike brick, lets light or wisdom shine through. She says, shine through capitals and monoliths, through shapes that pride can make, find a way to trace a grand design. Well, you know what grand design is. You've probably seen the program on TV or heard of it. A marvelous, sort of structure, architectural design or structure that everyone would love to live in. And it's linked to words like capital and monolith and pride. So pride, capitals, monoliths, grand designs, all these words, this sort of lexical field reminds us of ancient Rome or ancient Greece, the time of the Imperium, where people had ambition and a sense of power. But what she's trying to say is if we somehow use this sort of vulnerable medium for building, paper, we can have a truly great city. Raise a structure never meant to last. So ironically, it's a bit of a contradiction, but the fact that it's not meant to last is what in effect makes it great. Of paper smoothed and stroked and thinned again, polysintered to be transparent, turned into your skin. So what she's saying that the truly great city, a truly powerful city, will be one where we acknowledge the fact that we're simply passing individuals of our species, and that we need to keep the communication flowing in order to assert our sense of independence and being in the world. Okay, well, I hope you found that useful. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.